Hi, my name is Yarisa Huerta, and this is my commemorative speech on Robert F. Kennedy. This is my audience right here and the phone. June 6, 1968. Robert Francis Kennedy was pronounced dead after being fatally shot in the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles following his win at the California primary. He was 42. He would be widely remembered for his vision and ideals which focused on human rights for not just Americans, but for people around the world. Robert F. Kennedy was an inspiring figure who I admire for his political and social contributions for the good of the people. I am specifically inspired by Robert F. Kennedy's stance on civil rights, his dedication to helping underprivileged Americans, and resilience and dedication to his ideals. To begin, RFK had a good stance on the civil rights issue. As Attorney General, Bobby, as he was commonly known, actively fought for the civil rights of Black Americans. He was committed to making sure everyone had the same right to vote, same access to education, and was a supporter of desegregation. At the time, it was easy to ignore the movement, much less to support it. Taking a stance was something that even his brother, President Kennedy, had struggled with. It is even believed that RFK influenced JFK's stance on civil rights. He was an adamant supporter of desegregating and supporting Black Americans. He helped JFK propose the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was put into effect after President Kennedy's death. On multiple occasions, he sent help in the form of the National Guard to aid African Americans enrolling and or attending previously all-white schools. Furthermore, he was committed to helping underprivileged Americans. As senator, Bobby wanted resources available meant to help poverty-stricken Americans, and had established the Bedford Stuyvesant Restoration Corporation. It was the first nonprofit organization for the community in the country. Its goal was to improve employment opportunities and living conditions for Americans in Brooklyn. He was committed to dealing with poverty and helping out in ways that were not as common in the 60s. Similar to the civil rights issue, many politicians of the time had been against helping, especially since the impoverished Americans happened to be Americans of color. Despite that, he never wavered in his support or in his aid, and as a whole, the corporation was meant to address poverty and lack of resource throughout the country. The program is still active today, and his policies greatly impacted the communities of color throughout New York, and he is fondly remembered and honored by those communities. He set the precedent for aid that was provided for future Americans, which is widely worth something commemorating. Lastly, he believed in rights for people all around the world and stuck to his ideals that it was wrong of the U.S. to continue involvement in Vietnam and in the way that they were. Also, as senator, RFK traveled throughout Europe and Latin America promoting the idea that people should be able to involve themselves in government without fear of anything happening to them. He had also stressed that courage comes from standing up to a government that shows injustice. Regarding the Vietnam War, he had actively advocated for its end, breaking from President Johnson, who he had originally agreed with at the beginning of the war. He was immensely against the bombings in Vietnam and stood by his ideals that it was wrong of the U.S. to continue involvement without giving room for any sort of discussion on all sides. He was famously quoted saying, "Are we like the God of the Old Testament that we can decide in Washington, D.C., what cities, what towns, and what hamlets in Vietnam are going to be destroyed? I think we can do something about it." He wanted political reform in Vietnam, but he knew when things had turned wrong and actively dropped support when the U.S. involvement became detrimental for the people in Vietnam. His involvement and support abroad and the stance against the Vietnam War demonstrated that he cared about people everywhere and was willing to see flaws in all types of government, even the American government, when there was injustice. Robert F. Kennedy had greatly supported the civil rights issue, working hard to create equal opportunities for African Americans in voting and education. He had wanted to help impoverished Americans and had taken a stance against the Vietnam War when he saw that it was wrong. All reasons why I admire RFK. Robert F. Kennedy had greatly supported the civil rights issue, working to create equal opportunities for African Americans In conclusion, Robert Francis Kennedy was a great politician who was killed at the height of his career. He was not afraid to support things that may have not been as popular or that were more difficult to support, and that is why he is someone worth commemorating.